like condemning them to hell or anything like that.
No.
It depends on what kind of anathema you're talking about. Like
Dora.
Nestorius is anathema because he's not Christian.
Yeah, Dora. Here's the thing. Paul. He's basically the context why this all started. I was on a different live, right? And one girl was talking about, I would never call my Christian brothers and sisters heretics. And I told her,
People are so afraid of the word heretic. It just means you don't follow sound Orthodox lowercase o, like original beliefs. That's it. That's all it means.
Yeah, but we
Because
used to
people
like
have this
burn
connotation
heretics.
Like the N-word of religious people.
Yeah,
They think heretic means like it's literally like a slur.
like Catholic.
yeah. Everybody up here is a heretic except for me.
Yeah,
So.
you're a heretic too. Anyway, but here's the.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
And
I get frustrated with the label heretic because, like, oftentimes it's stated that Protestants, like Lutherans, have no connection to the historical church, and that frustrates us because we think we are the historical church, not like the Calvinists who think there's something different. So that frustrates us.
Hold up, you believe you're the true church?
Yeah, we think we're the Catholic Church restored.
What kind
That-
of Lutheran are you?
What?
God bless everyone. God bless.
God bless you, man. What kind of Lutheran are you?
Like that being said, though, like for reference, Saint Joan of Arc was burned at the stake for being a heretic, or they accused her of being a heretic because the English didn't like her. But like, heretics used to be burned.
Yeah, I mean, but it also depends on what kind of heresy.
I guess. Like, it must have been bad enough for one of the early church fathers to smack Arius, or was it punch him or something?
Thank you, Grissetti. That was very funny. But I guess I would say I'm a very, very high church Lutheran. I guess.
So are you like a European type Lutheran, or?
Yeah, even though I am American.
Yeah, I got you.
So yeah, I try to hold to traditional Lutheran identity, which is we are, in reality, the evangelical Catholics. Not evangelical in the modern sense, because that's disgusting, but evangelical in the old sense.
Yeah, but how would y'all? Okay, I'm not trying to like come at you.
No, I get it. I get it. We're not
I'm just
very
curious.
well.
I'm curious. Since you think you're the true church, how would you defend apostolic succession?
That is
Would
a
you say-
question I've not really fully explored. I know the Estonian Lutheran Church actually has what you guys would consider valid apostolic succession. I guess what we view as apostolic succession is succession of their teachings, not as much as laying on of hands from one to another. That's the understanding that you guys have, right?
Yeah, I mean, so pretty much you would change the definition of what apostolic succession is.
Pretty much, yeah. We don't hold it as like a necessary thing. Which is why I believe that's why you guys say our Eucharist isn't valid, right?
That's why we say what?
Our Eucharist isn't valid because it's not performed by an apostolic successive.
Yeah,
priest.
we would say. Well, it depends on first, like intent, like what's the meaning behind it. Like if you do see it as a true body. Well, I mean, y'all do. I know what y'all believe, but like that's a big one. And another one is like, do you have a valid priest that does the sacrament? You know.
Yeah, I get it, and I think that's one of the things that I kind of wish that like we wouldn't have done. I wish we would have tried to maintain episcopacy and tried to have some more continuity. I feel like that would have done wonders for us, but
Well, in an apostolic sense, like any apostolic church would automatically dismiss you because that's like core to being a church, you know, in our view.
Yeah, that was the best comment. He's an average Lutheran, believes he's the Catholic Church. Don't worry, you and Jaden are doggy paddling across the Tiber as we speak, Luth.
All right. But
You'll be
yeah.
there. You'll be there soon, brother. But here's the thing. I highly respect high church Protestants. I've come to realize that. Because there's such a wide
That's a W. That's a
There's
W.
such a
Because,
wide
like,
spectrum of I read my NIV Bible occasionally in my bedroom alone, and the church isn't a building, and I want a relationship, not a religion, blah, 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 those people. And then the next step up would be like low church, but actually going to a congregation like Baptist or Pentecostal or whatever. And then you take a step up from that would probably be like Presbyterian, Methodist, stuff like that, even though my least favorite Protestant doctrine is Calvinism. I think it's directly from the pits of hell. And then the next step up from that would be Lutherans and Anglicans. Now, are there some bad ones? Of course. There's rainbow
What do you think
flag.
is so bad about Calvinism?
Bro, it's disgusting, bro.
Double
Yeah,
predestination.
which part?
Double
What part?
predestination.
Well,
Double
Catholics
predestination.
believe in that.
That's enough. That's bad enough.
The sentence right here, Logos. God predestines people to damnation for the glory of his name. That's not the same God that I worship.
Yeah, but you do follow a sense of double predestination as well.
Negative. In what sense?
Oh yes, you do.
Could you explain?
Let me see. I'm trying to see. Hold up. Let me see. You know Milton Thomas?
Yeah, I know Milton Thomas. Again, this is why I'm not a
Yeah.
Thomist.
Yeah. Look up his. Look up his. I think it's a pretty recent video, like within the last month.
I've actually heard.
It's pretty
rumblings
long.
about this.
It's pretty long, but like you do look at. There's a sense where you do believe in double predestination,
Double
just not in the
predestination?
Calvinist.
I
Yeah,
had
just
a
not in
long
the Catholic sense.
I had a long debate with two Muslims at Speaker's Corner about double predestination, and I basically said, "Oh, your God is Al-Wadud. He's all loving, or the most loving. How can he be all loving if he wills people to hell?" And then I went through with them explaining
So
about
here
double
are the
predestination,
only-
and they just
the
broke
Catholic
down.
Church allows a wide range of views on predestination that are allowed, right? Not conscience binding. You can hold to Thomist view, you can hold to this view, that view, whatever. But here are the things that we do affirm. Number one, God is merciful. He does not want anyone to suffer eternal damnation. Okay. Number two, God's plan includes each person's free response to his grace. People have the freedom to accept or reject him, and they must freely choose him to build a relationship with him. Number three,
Synergism.
the merit synergism, amen. W synergism. The meritorious works are a partial cause of their eternal happiness. And lastly, number four, no one is predestined to sin. God does not predestine people to sin as a means to eternal damnation. People who go to hell do so because of a willful turning away of God or mortal sin that they persist in until the very end of life. That's the only things we
Yes.
have to hold to.
So only thing like a Calvinist would, like a true Calvinist, there's weird range of Calvinists, but anything like a true Calvinist would believe everything you just said except for the whole willful. Well, okay, so they would say it's
Would
still
they believe
willful.
that God's
They
plan
would
of
say they would still say it's willful, but it's because God gave you the choice to make that will. He gave you the option.
I guess I would affirm that if they worded as God gave us free will to will against him. Sure.
Well, no. So they would say like, okay, so because they have a view of total depravity, it's saying that we couldn't even choose God if we wanted to in the beginning stage, unless God reached out first and said, "Hey, look, I'm giving you the Holy Spirit. I'm giving you this, and now you can, God has to draw you."
that is what that anecdotally that is what happened to me.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it happens-
and Lutherans.
it is true,
Lutherans
and
I
we-
wasn't
have
seeking.
as well.
But speaking
We believe that in a sense,
non-anecdotally,
though.
Okay,
We
one at a
believe that
time.
in a sense. We believe that in a sense, though, like all of us. But we just don't
Yeah.
believe that we are totally depraved, where we cannot choose God out of our own without God acting.
Exactly. I do not believe in total depravity. So Now, you used to be a Calvinist, so you're pretty well versed in this, right? Let me ask you some questions. Do they not affirm that we are never divinized or go through theosis, that we're always a piece of shit, and that God just declares us righteous?
Well, okay, so they break up what we would call like theos of divinization. They kind of break up in like pieces. So
Okay.
they would say like, justification, sanctification, glorification, which is kind of like theosis to us. But they put it in like little pieces and categories. So their view of sanctification is kind of like our theosis, but
So do
they
you
have a
become
different they have a different
better?
view of grace. Like grace doesn't really mean much to them as like to us. Like grace is not like a thing. It's just like a favor, a disposition of
What
God.
didn't you say that was the thing that made it click for you that it's incorrect?
Yeah, I mean that's all wrong.
The
Like,
idea
if
of
you
grace,
understand,
right?
if you understand what grace is, then I don't understand how you can be a Protestant.
Amen, bro. It's an unmerited
Mem-
gift from God.
Memra.
Yeah.
Do you understand like the difference between? Because I think from my understanding with Calvinism, you have this idea of penal substitution, versus in Catholicism we have
can't
vicarious
stand that
satisfaction.
either.
But we
Yeah,
have
okay,
vicarious
so
satisfaction.
That's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true either. Like all churches agree in a sense of penal substitution, just not the Calvinist view. The Calvinist view is like toxic.
But I mean,
But,
because
like, we all
you said
believe-
about like the like we sin and God, but then God declares us righteous, rather than this idea that Christ through vicarious satisfaction, like that's how we are saved, is through Christ, not that like God switches on different like lenses and just like declares us
Yeah.
as clean when we're not.
Yeah, we would say the incarnation
How would,
or like
how would
God's
Calvinists? Sorry, go
God's
ahead.
plan. We would say the incarnation or God's plan is the drawing automatically to the world. But like Calvinists would just say like he picks out individually by intent. That's the kind of weird thing.
Yeah, how do they decide? Do they explain how God chooses the elect?
Just his sovereignty, however he decides. It's
So
his
they just
will.
say, only Allah knows, kind of thing.
So when we say like, okay, we believe in election too. We believe in predestination. But we see it as like a group. So like Israel was elect, right? The new
Priestly
church
nation,
is-
the light of the world.
Exactly.
The new church is the new Israel.
And what they would do is they would, instead of taking it like as Israel or the new Israel, the church, Gentiles and Jews, whatever, they would break it up into individual. Instead, that's the issue. Like they see it as like, oh, the elect is like certain people. And we would say, no, the elect is like the church.
How would one know as a Calvinist if he's truly elect or not?
Is it not by work?
If you really know, like if you're like a true Calvinist, they're honest and they would say they don't know it unless they finish the race the same way we do.
They just hope, but it's also like a weird like double speak too, because you're like, we're the elect, but I don't know I'm the elect, but my fruits will show I'm the elect, but I'll persevere to the end no matter what. So it's kind of like a weird
Yeah, I
double
mean-
speak, circular reasoning kind of thing.
It is really weird because you do have a sense of assurance of salvation. Because you think you know your own heart and like, well, I know I trust God and I know I did this, whatever. But you don't know that you're elect unless you finished the race and you're in heaven. Like a true Calvinist would say that.
But aren't you going to persevere to the end regardless?
They hope that they are that person.
The thing I find
Yeah, that's-
I find problem with this like pure election idea of like you're the elect and that's how you're saved.
A lot of it, dude. The penal substitution thing, and correct me if I'm wrong on anything, Logos, because you were a Calvinist for years, you know this better than me, but like PSA being like reducing God's sacrifice and his love for us to basically like a judicial structure of like, okay, God just says, okay, Jesus healthy, you're always going to be shit, covers you thing because you're totally depraved. And I don't know if I'm misspeaking or I don't want to straw man the but it just seems like it reduces it to like this mere judicial process
Yeah,
It's like
it is.
true.
It is. The whole thing is judicial. Like the whole view of Reformed theology is pretty much very judicial. They're like
I
a
don't
courtroom instead of
that. I think
what.
that
Like when they see the word court in the Bible, they see a courtroom. When we see the word court, we see like the heavenly court. We see
yeah.
it
So
completely
like when
differently.
they see you won't get out till you paid the last penny kind of thing. They picture a courtroom with God saying like you're damned,
Well, bro,
and then Jesus
I
says,
cried.
"But
I
I made
cried
the
one day.
sacrifice."
Would
Right?
that be a
Jesus,
good assessment
Yeah.
though?
Jesus is your lawyer and God's the judge, right? And God's trying to damn you, but Jesus says, "No, I've paid his
Yeah.
penalty." Right?
That's kind of how they look at it. I mean, Calvin was he was a lawyer. Like that's what he did.
I know, but it's just like, how do you look at history and go like, "Oh yeah, that's right."
Well, that's
You
an
got it
interesting
wrong for
point actually.
1600 years.
That is an interesting point because we're coming from a perspective as Catholics or as non Calvinist Christians of coming from Christ and Christ having this understanding of a father and a son. You look at Islam and it's because Muhammad was a slave trader or a slave owner. The context of in relation to God is through a slave owner relationship, and with
Yeah, the only
Calvin it's whatever his
relationship you can
profession
have.
was.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just me, but I clearly see like man's own life experiences and his own ideas projected onto the gospel and the religion and the ecclesiology and the soteriology of it.
I mean, we all like all the churches agree with ESA in a sense. It's just their sense. When you like, look, especially like Calvin's view, like Calvin specific view. I don't think like many like smart Calvinists hold to that actually, but like specifically Calvin's view just brings this unity into the Trinity.
Yep.
So that's the main issue because it's like kind of like Christ gets separated from the Father,
Yes.
and that's the issue.
Actually, I have
That's-
some. I read that Calvin had doubts about the eternal generation of the Son.
Man, Calvin has had a couple of weird issues, but the thing about Calvinism is it makes complete sense in its own bubble. But if you look outside the bubble, it falls apart.
They were talking about how I think someone was accusing it of being a cult this morning on Dre's list, and there was a big fight between Bible Guy and the Messianic Jews and Coptic Prince, and yeah, like if you're in that bubble, and I don't want to call it a cult, but if you're in that belief system, you're like, yeah, this makes sense. But then if you look at, I don't know, man, I feel like these people just kind of put on a blind eye to history. Maybe they just haven't studied it. Maybe they're just ignorant of it. But if you just look back and see, okay, no one believed this. No one. So, I mean, if you want to try and pervert Augustine and say that you believe this, that's all you're standing on is a perversion of one father who didn't believe what you believe.
Well, that's the thing. Like they do know history. Like a smart one really does know history, but they look at history from a different lens.
How can you?
But
Yes.
that's the point. They
Like-
look at it from a different lens. Like they got tunnel vision pretty much from one angle, and that angle is kind of like you got to maneuver and tiptoe around certain things. But they don't see like the big picture of what like we see.
I think is there a term called the extra Calvisticum or something like that?
Is that
Like
what?
where there's the fathers secretly had Calvinist teaching. I don't know. Maybe it's something we make fun of the Calvinists for, but
He
like
just
essentially we
pranks.
say
Oh yeah, yeah. They believe that like it's the teaching that was always there. It's just the understanding that we have like as apostolics is wrong. Like the same way like you said, BG went to and said that faith alone was always taught just because of church fathers said faith alone. Because they look in that in isolation, they don't look at what the church father says as a whole.
Yeah, he says faith alone for initial justification. Every Christian would agree with, right?
Yeah, so they take that and run with it. So it's kind of like quote mining.
Ex-
But
It is
But,
quote
then-
mining, and some
then
kid
like
tried to
a couple sentences later, he says, I don't know, the Eucharist is needed for salvation, and then they
Yeah,
kind of
that's
like
what
skip
I'm
that.
doing, yeah.
Then they skip that part and say, well, church fathers contradict each other.
Well, here's what Augustine will say, because he's my most studied father, and it drives me up a friggin' wall when Reform try and quote mine him in eisegete what he's doing, right? So he'll say something like, a man is like initially justified by faith alone. Excellent. I agree with that. But then he'll also say, but if you continue in your evil ways and you think that there still remains a sacrifice for you, you are a fool, right? So that would like directly go against what their belief is. And things like even if you take out the fathers and you just read the Bible alone, I still don't see it. It's like, well, what's the thing? I'm so tired today. I'm drawing a blank on it. What's the thing where limited atonement? All right. How do you hold to limited atonement? Yet you see verses constantly like God desires all men be saved. God desires that no men be damned. Right. Like so, how do you see the Christ on the cross was?
In a sense, see that's the weird part because in a sense we all believe in limited atonement.
But you know what I
It's
mean?
just-
Like they believe it from like the front. They believe it from like the beginning forward. We look at it backwards. Like I would say, all the saints will persevere, but it's only the ones that make it to the end. Like every saint ended up persevering, but I don't believe that you're going to automatically persevere to become a saint. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like backwards.
Exactly.
And same with
Exactly,
limited
that's the
atonement. Is Christ's sacrifice only for the ones who are saved? True, but that doesn't mean only the ones that are saved the sacrifice is for.
The sacrifice is intended for everyone, but not everyone.
It's exactly. But like
But-
they're kind of looking at it from, I guess I would say from the beginning onward, and we're looking at it from the end backwards.
Yeah, because they say what we're saying is that God somehow failed. And we're just like, no, God just gave us free will.
Like here's
Yeah,
just
so
a
they're-
couple.
they're really big on
here's just a
sovereignty of
couple
God.
things on like total depravity, right? Romans 12. For I say through the grace given unto me that every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, accordingly, as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. So they believe that God gives, that a man's incapable of believing because God has to give them the faith, which we were talking about earlier. The Romans is saying he's giving to every man this measure of faith. It's just up to him to reject or accept, right? Or 2 Peter 3:9, the Lord's not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long suffering to us, not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. So the Lord wishes all to be saved, but obviously not all will be saved because many will reject.
I want to know
Yeah,
what
and
you
by the way,
think of.
the Lutheran view is somewhere in between. Is somewhere in between. We affirm total depravity, and we say that like you can't come to love and like follow God on your own, but we say you have free will to reject it. So it's like you have free will to accept or reject. We say we have free will to reject. They say you don't have, or the Calvinists just say you don't have free will at all. Is that the correct understanding?
No.
Well,
They don't say that you don't have free will at all. They say that in
No,
your
yeah.
nature. They say with you. Okay, so it's like, for example, let's say there's a dog in front of you, and you hold a piece of a carrot and a steak. Dog has the free will to choose the carrot if he wants to, but he's not going to because his nature is to go for the steak.
I've heard that
So that's
exact
kind of
analogy from multiple Calvinist logos.
Can I
Yeah,
make
know.
a make a
This is
parallel
one-
with
this
this?
is one rep, but it's your nature that's fallen. It's your nature that's fallen. So
And then, like,
you have
what about perseverance of the saints? Where they say, if you're chosen, if you're elect, you will persevere till the end, no matter what, right?
yeah.
And then in Matthew 24, it says, "But it's he that shall endure unto the end; he shall be saved." Yup, says endure to the end. If one endures to the end, they will be saved.
Yeah, it's the same thing pretty much in their view.
I
So
want
they
to
say,
I want
like,
to draw a parallel.
If you're, you will endure.
Yeah, but this one isn't saying that he will endure till the end and be saved. It's the one that will endure to the end. Not
Yeah,
you
so
will
there's
endure
just-
to the end and be saved. It's if you endure to the end, you will be saved.
Yeah,
So-
I mean they would say it's semantics. I mean, in their view, it'd be like just looking at it from the other side of the story. You know.
Yeah.
I'm-
What do you
I'm
think
gonna-
the biggest hole in Calvinism is? Oh, I'm sorry, March. Go ahead. You've been wanting to talk. My bad, buddy.
I want to make a parallel with Islam and what it says in the Quran because I think like So put it this way. So I think it's this is going to be edgy for you guys, but Surah 66 verse 6. Don't ask me why I chose that specifically one, but it says that the angels. Yeah, that's why I checked it. But like, what it says there in the Quran is that the angels cannot disobey, and then you have jinn, which are essentially demons,
Demons.
beings
But there's
of
good
smokeless
ones and
fire.
bad ones.
Yeah, as in jinn, like there's good and bad jinn, and then there's angels which are separate, and then the angels cannot disobey. The angels don't have any free will, but then you have jinn which have free will, and like the idea of the devil and demons being jinn. And I don't know if like people are supposed to be like an in between, or they're like the jinn in that they do have free will, because like I feel like there's a lot of parallel with it with Calvinism, where it's like technically they believe you have free will, but in practice they
dude.
actually don't.
Thank you for reminding me of this because I totally saw parallels between Islam and Calvinism before. Like in Islam, you have no free will. Sometimes they bullshit you and say
But I
you
mean,
do,
it makes the
but
claim.
Allah-
It makes
bad
it makes the claim that you
That's
have
a
free
bad
will.
understanding of Calvinism, though.
You think that's a bad understanding?
Yeah, if you draw in parallel, there's no parallel with that. I mean, there's some
None?
Calvinists that will misrepresent the Calvinist position to make it sound like it, like these hyper crazy Calvinists. But there's really no comparison between that and Islam in that sense.
I know they
Because
both
Islam,
believe
you
they
have
both
no-
believe
you have no
in double
free will.
predestination. They both believe in double predestination. They
Correct.
both claim.
That's the point.
I think they both claim free will, but they don't actually have it in practice.
Correct. Allah predestines you to heaven or hell while you're in the womb, before you're in the womb. All right.
And then you get
That's
to
the
I
only
mean,
parallel.
kinda-
predestination.
you get to choose everything. Like that's
I mean,
what
we kind of-
stumped me
we
was you
we
get to
kind
make
of believe that
decisions,
too,
but it's
though.
written anyway. Like they have the term mashallah. Like I saw like an example of it of like, oh, someone gets in a car accident and they get sent to hell, and then like a Muslim's response is mashallah. Like God, because God writes everything, God must have willed that to happen because because there's this idea of he's written everything, and so everything that he's omniscient about must be. It's this confusion between omniscience and his will, that if he's knows of it, that means he's willed it, rather than separating the two.
These are very nuanced conversations, and most people just make it black and white. And there's very like little tiny things that you really have to look at. Because I mean, we kind of believe in the same things they believe. We just have slight differences. It's just weird. I don't know how to explain it. Like it depends on what you're picking apart. So like, God created the world. He knew what was going to happen. He knew was going to, who's going to go where. But he chose to create. So we obviously know that.
The difference would be like this. Instead of actively choosing who's damned or
That's it.
saved, it's,
I
just-
he cre-
I just had a bit-
I'd
I just
like
had
to
an
think-
interesting
I'd like to
idea
think of
about
it like
that.
this.
So
It's kind of a base and course analogy, but hold on, Mach. I would think of it like this. God, let's call the world like a zoo, right? And he's the zookeeper. He built the zoo, he put all the animals in it, right? And he put them all together. And now what the animals do in the zoo, he's not controlling what they do. Let's say a cheetah eats an antelope or something like that. He's not actively telling them or forcing them to do it. It's just he created it, has the foreknowledge of what's going to happen, and is letting it play out.
Yeah, that's the issue. You hit it right on the spot. Like it's the divine intent for people to be saved and some not. That's the core weird part.
That's it. That's the
So-
difference. It's like we believe, well, obviously, we both affirm that God knows everything, has complete foreknowledge of what's going to happen. He created people that he knows are going to be damned anyways, but he just knows they're going to be damned. He didn't actively will for them to be damned.
Yeah, it doesn't separate between the
Definitely not
intellect
for
and the will.
majority of the people.
And I spoke with, I don't know if you know Thomas Apologia. It's like he does like
It sounds
apologetic
kind of
stuff.
familiar.
Yeah, he's like a Catholic apologist. He's a bit of a Thomistic, but we were talking about this, and he was saying that like You're going through about like what's meant by persons in the Trinity and the difference between begetting and procession, and the idea that that I don't know the accuracy, but that the Son is begotten, and that's a procession of the intellect, whereas with the Holy Spirit it's a procession of the will. And like there's the separation between the two, that intellect and omniscience coming into that when it comes to God is different to God's will, and the procession of the will, which is you have knowledge, but then that knowledge is used to make decisions, and the will is executed using the intellect. So they're connected, but they're still independent of each other. Like they're independent faculties, even in a divine sense.
Yeah. What up,
But I
Tay?
think
Long time
maybe
no see,
Islam, it doesn't differentiate, and it says because there's a link, they must be interconnected without that separation. And so if God knows something, he must have willed it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we always say, foreknowledge does not equal predestination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a Calvinist would go into the sovereignty of God. You know, can God fail His will? That's kind of the weird, where they would kind of try to attack us.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, it all comes back to this. If you ask any Christian, do you want to be a Christian how the original ones were? Do you want to practice and be like the apostles and their descendants, what Jesus taught? They all say yes. So why don't you look back in history and find that? It's not like it's not accessible, right? And obviously, if it's something that came 1,600 years later, it cannot possibly be what Jesus taught.
I'm telling you, if you want to see the difference in the churches, in all of our churches, what the main difference is between, you know, Protestants, Orthodox, Catholics, everybody, it's their view of what sin is and what sin does. And then everything else trickles from there. Like if you understand the soteriology
I think
part,
it's justification and sanctification is where the difference
well,
is.
but see, the sin actually leads to that. So
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
look
I
at
mean, sin is directly related to that.
what their view of sin is, like what that does to you, and anybody, every church, what your view is of what sin is and what it does to you leads to how you get salvation out of it. And all of us have a different view of what sin is.
Yep, that's true.
What do you
It's
understand sin to be?
true.
What'd you say?
What do you understand sin to be?
Separation in relationship to God.
Because I agree, but I think my understanding is, like when I've spoken to Muslims about this, it's been God wills everyone to heaven, and it's about aligning our will with that will. And I think I particularly view sin in the context of the will. And it's...
Yeah. And that's the thing, everybody sees it differently. Some people would say it's like a separation from God, like a complete separation. Some people would say it's like a corruption. It's actually like a substance. Some people would say, you know, it's just like a separation in like a relationship.
It's like a
Everybody has
separation
like
of
a different
what?
view.
It's like a separation of what? And if you say corruption, then the corruption is a description of negative action, right? Corruption is a behavior, or it's a manifestation of behavior. Like to act
I think that's
corrupt.
ethics.
So like for us, it would be, like for Orthodox, it would be just a separation in relationship.
Okay.
Like you separate it in relationship to God, so you're separated from the source of life,
Yeah.
spiritual
But,
and physical.
but I mean, like, because of what leads to that, like sin is an action, right?
Sin is an action. Yes, and
Yeah,
So
it is.
So as in it's an execution of your will in contrary to God's will. And so that's where
Jordan
the
says-
separation is.
Jordan, what's your question
Yeah.
about the understanding of a verse? You can either come up, it'd probably be easier to come up, but if you can't, just type it in the chat. Yeah, sin would just be a separation from God, simply.
Yeah.
Something that separates you from our God.
I mean, disobeying his will. You could do the semantics any way you want, but that's the separation. Disobeying his will, what he has told us, or going against his will.
I think because it's when I think of the idea of sainthood, I see it as being the opposite, and like the way that I understand that it's been described that I've understand best is God asks something from you and you say yes, and you try to say yes every time. Which is God has a will. He informs you of that will, and you meet your will with that.
So it's a separation of will. So we are slaves to the law.
Well,
So
because
basically, Galatians
the
3:15,
slave doesn't
that
have will.
Christ- He has a question about Christ becoming a curse for us. So all that means is that Christ took on sin, right? So the curse that Adam and Eve brought into the world of sin. He took that upon himself, died on the cross to kill death, basically, unalive death. He takes upon himself the curse that's found in, I gotta look this up, Deuteronomy somewhere. Deuteronomy 21:23, about executed criminals hanged in public to free us from the curse of the law. So the church would explain it as his death on the cross frees us from the curse of that law and allows us to be saved by faith. Because like people not being able to follow the law without breaking it, everyone's cursed by it because no one could ever follow it perfectly, thus separating them from God. So Christ took this upon himself along with all the sins past, present, and future, paid the price, and reconciled us to God. That's why he's the one mediator, because we were separated from God. Now we are reconciled. So now
Hold
we're
on,
free,
and you
from,
just said-
we're free from the law. And go ahead, Willis.
Just real quick, I just want to, like, it sounded kind of weird. You said like, he takes on the sins, past, present, and future.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
What does that mean? Yeah, I don't know. That's not quite the Catholic position. But what do you mean when you say that?
So when he was on that cross, he took the sins, past, present, and future of mankind.
And like he took it on himself?
Took it on himself. What does it say? One without sin became sin so that we may be freed from death.
So you're saying God took on sin?
Yeah, he didn't sin himself. He took on our sin for us and was the sacrificial lamb for it. He consumed death.
I don't want
so that we could
I
consume
don't want to correct you. I don't want to correct you here and whatever. But ask somebody about that because that's not quite your position.
You sure about that?
More. Yeah, I'm positive.
Okay, I'll double check myself, but
I just don't want you to say something wrong.
But the sinless
myself.
part, the fulfillment of the law part, is that, as far as I'm aware,
like,
is actually also a Jewish
saying
prophecy.
hold on. Do you think that I'm saying God punished the Son on the cross?
No, you're saying that God took on sin himself, like he took our sins. And I think what you're saying sounds very like Protestant. It's not quite your position. Okay, so like our position, for example, would be the curse is his death. Like that's what he did. He just took on death.
Sin and death.
Yeah, he just took on death, and then
So he took on the wage of sin.
Death. Yeah, the wage of sin is death.
2
So he
Corinthians
took that
5
on
is what he's saying. I'm
willingly.
sorry.
Yeah, so he took that on willingly, but he didn't like take sin into himself or on himself
Yeah.
as
Second-
like a sin.
2
Buddy,
Corinthians 5, 20 and 21.
I'm reading straight from the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, and it says, "Salvation then depends on faith in Christ who died on the cross, taking upon himself the curse found in Deuteronomy to free us from the curse of the law."
Yeah, the curse is different than the sin.
The curse being to die on a tree.
Exactly.
Yes. So where did
Yeah.
I misspeak?
So when you say like he took on sin, is like saying he took on a substance, he took on evil, like God took on the contrary to grace, pretty much.
I didn't mean it that way, but let me rephrase.
Yeah,
it.
but that's kind of the way that some Protestants see it, like as an actual like
Yeah,
he
like
took
I
on
don't
sin.
believe he
Like,
took on the sin because the Father had to pour his wrath out on him, like Protestants believe. I don't believe that.
Yeah,
let
Protestants
me
bend
rephrase.
Second Corinthians 5, Paul. Protestants bend that. That's why it sounds like a Protestant then. But Second Corinthians
Catholic
5, 20 and 21
Hold on.
is there. Sorry.
So he didn't take on the sin, he took on the punishment? Or
What's up, guys?
he took on when he says he took on the sin, that means he took on death.
yeah. So the elaboration is that taking on the punishment of the sin. So when it says the sin, it means the punishment of the sin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like,
he
he didn't
was
take
like a
He
lamb
didn't
of
take on
atonement,
like
but it's
some
not that.
negative substance or something evil. He didn't take on any of that.
Yeah.
He just
Well,
took
becau-
on the consequence, and that's when
that-
Christus Victor comes in. You know, he
But
defeated
that because that would go against like the fulfillment of the messianic prophecy. As far as I'm aware,
Okay.
like
let me
there was a messianic
rephrase.
prophecy. As far as I'm
Let me
aware,
rephrase
the Messiah wasn't supposed to come until the law was perfectly fulfilled by people, and the argument by Christians to Jews is that the law was perfectly fulfilled in the person of Christ,
Okay,
and then the
so
Messiah
let me-
actually came and fulfilled the law perfectly himself.
Let me just rephrase the whole thing. So, became a curse, took on the curse for us, right, to free us from that curse of law and death. But he consumed death so that we could consume life. He became the sin offering, but didn't take on sin himself.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Amen. That's good.
Okay,
That's what I was going to say, guys. Because
He's not-
hata,
Yeah.
hata in Hebrew could be sin
It's-
or sin
it's-
offering. It could be either.
The word is hamartia.
I just see it, HATA.
Hamartia.
Okay.
Okay, so it's the sin offering from Leviticus and Isaiah.
Yeah, Leviticus 20.
Hamartia is the suffering Messiah who made himself a sin offering. And Paul uses this in 2 Corinthians 5, referring to Jesus as hamartia, becoming the atoning sacrifice for the redemption of the world, rather than becoming sin itself. So I shouldn't have even said he took on sin. I was thinking of it more as like the scapegoat, where they would put
Exactly.
they would put the sins on the lamb.
Day of Atonement.
Exactly. So that's
But then he's
exactly
not
what I
that.
didn't want you to do.
He's the
He
Paschal lamb.
he fulfilled many sacrifices because you
Of
have
course, he's the
also
Paschal lamb.
not just that.
In order for the Paschal lamb to be efficacious, you have to physically consume it and drink the blood, or in the old Paschal lamb, sprinkle the blood on the doorpost.
Yeah, and the sacrifice of the mass is a direct reflection of the Levitical
You have
law.
also continuation sacrifice to the temple that was done every morning and every evening.
Yeah.
And he was also that kind of lamb. Even his crucifixion and when he get unalived basically happened in the time when that sacrifice will be finished into the temple, because it was like two sacrifices, but it was count like one. You will sacrifice one lamb in the morning, one lamb in the evening. So second sacrifice of the lamb on the evening, it's correlates with Jesus Christ getting alive on the cross. So he even fulfilled that also sacrifice, you know.
Well, the
So
death
he
is the
took all-
is the mortal sin part. The death is the mortal sin part, and then in communion, like as far as I'm aware, communion atones for venial sin. Because that's what the Levitical sacrifice of the lamb was for atoning venial sin, and then death
When
was
he
the punishment for
institutes
mortal.
the Eucharist,
Yeah.
institutes the
Yeah, so-
Eucharist. Hold on one.
Yeah, so Paul, here was my issue with that, okay? Because like the original sacrifice, the lamb it just died. It was a pure lamb that died. That's all it was. The sin was taken on by the scapegoat, right? It wasn't the lamb that took on the sin. It was the scapegoat that took on the sin, and the scapegoat was separated. So the scapegoat is not the lamb. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I mean, Christ draws parallels to both.
So brought, and he took on something like seeped into my subconscious, and I misspoke about it.
So in my view, this is me
Thank
personally.
you
I
for
think
correcting me. And I'm and
in
I've
my
literally
view,
been
I think the
doing-
scapegoat was. In my view, I think the scapegoat was Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas.
God. Said for yeah. Good deal.
Yeah, I think like that was the choice. Like Christ was the lamb and Barabbas was the scapegoat.
I know, at least in terms of the lamb was sacrificed for venial sin. Like, that's what I know, is they take the fat and they burn the fat, and the fat was offered up to God. And the priest would take parts of the lamb and consume some of it, but then the fat would be burned as their offering, as in God would consume it in the fire. But then in
And that
communion,
lamb
it's the
offering
other way around.
Was pure. That
Like, it's the opposite way around to the
that
Levitical
lamb
law.
offering was pure. It didn't take on anything.
Yeah. God in the Mass, God gives the offering and then we receive, rather than us giving the offering and God receives.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so him taking on the curse was pretty much just the incarnation into death. He lowered himself to become human, which is already lower, and then he took on death itself. That's what the curse means.
But the other thing that I mentioned, I think, which is also important, is he took on the law. Because one of the messianic prophecies was, as far as I've heard, was that the Messiah wouldn't come until the law was perfectly embodied by the people. But like, it didn't specify, maybe, and then like it was embodied by Christ himself as the Messiah when he did come. Or like,
Yeah, I mean Christ.
the
was
Messiah
only-
himself
Christ
fulfilled
was the
his
only
own
person
prophecy.
that fulfilled the law.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christ is the only person that could fulfill the law.
But as in, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
What I do find, which is quite interesting, is the Eucharist. When you have Eucharistic miracles, like say with the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano, like when they've tested it, it's been heart tissue, and like that's what I was maybe trying to hint at when I was talking about the will and the association with the will. Is like
I don't
The
quite
will-
understand what you're saying.
the association with the will and the heart. Like, your heart is like, I think, like, because when I think like the description of the mind being the intellect, the heart, and Christ, when Christ refers to the heart, it's referring to the will, and when he's referring to the flesh, it's referring to the lower faculties. And like, each element is further away from God. Like, the intellect is what's closest, then the will, then the flesh is the furthest away. And sin is an inversion of that structure, and it's making the flesh take precedence and the flesh takes control of the will over the intellect. But then the intellect
it's
is
a battle
supposed to use the
between
will.
flesh and
Yeah, because
yeah, it's
the
a
world
battle
wants to
between
flip
flesh
it.
and your spirit.
Yeah. Because the
That's
world
why
wants to flip
for
it.
us, that's why for us fasting is such a big deal, because fasting is giving control to the spirit instead of your flesh.
Yeah. That's also why I say about sin as being like, why I understand it to be this view of the will is that like the sacraments, and particularly communion and the Eucharist, being that, like, I understand it as being metaphorical and literal, which is the only way for you to align your will with God's will is for His will to literally become your will. And that would make sense in receival of the Eucharist, because the Eucharist is literally a receiving. If you want, like, if I think about like Eucharistic miracles, it's receiving of the heart
Grace.
specifically. Yeah, but grace manifested through the heart, through a gift of God's will, so that it can take precedence over ours.
Yeah, I mean, we would say that's the same in every form of grace that you receive. Just there's different kinds of like importance to certain graces.
Yeah.